Wow. First, I just want to say thank you so, so much. And for those who know me, and I was just talking about crying. And so, like, to give this before my talk is, maybe a little cruel. But I am honored beyond words. And thank you. And I just want to give it to some other people, but thank you so much. So I know time is of the utmost importance. So I want to start off. So Greg and myself are going to talk about legal protections for people with substance use disorder. And we're going to do it through a couple of cases, which is sort of how we found our way to each other to create this talk together.
So Greg can hear us. Can you say hi?
I could, hello.
Great.
Oh, I think we,
yeah, we'll be able to see, but he's here.
Yeah. I have some folks up here with me that I'm really excited about. So, me and Greg are great, but I'm even more excited to introduce Amelia, who will talk in a little bit. And then I also have Jim, Sarah, and Harrison here. And I think they really will be the highlight of this presentation and who we will learn the most from. Neither Greg nor I have any disclosures. And then things that we're going to learn about. So not just only about the legal protections for folks with substance use disorders in 3 settings. So outpatient pharmacies, jails, subacute rehabs, and SNF. And I think all of us who are providers in some capacity, really interface with these places while we're working with folks. And then what to do when we face a barrier, right? So like knowledge is great, but if you don't know what to do next, what is the point? So here's my first case. And so this is I'm a fellow now. So it's almost 2 years ago. I was a 2nd-year resident and I was in clinic, and I have this lovely patient. He's 21. He has a history of opioid use disorder. He's on Suboxone 8 milligrams 3 times a day. And I'd seen him pretty recently, comes in like once a month. And then I got a message that he lost his Suboxone and needed a refill, which is like very straightforward, right? All of us lose our meds and then need a refill. I was excited that he'd called for a refill. So I resent the prescription to a pharmacy. I'm currently not allowed to like name these places, but I really, really want to. But Greg knows about them. And so, initially, he went to try to pick up his prescription and wasn't able to and let me know. And I was like, oh, I probably like messed up the prescription. I'm sure it's something on my end. I apologize. And I was like, let me resend it. So I resent it and I was like, oh, like sending it the same way, everything looks right. But whatever, I'll like send it again. And then the patient messages me again. He's like at the he had been at the pharmacy for like an hour at this point. And again, he told me the pharmacist saying like he like doesn't have it, like he won't give it to me. And I was like, strange. So I called the pharmacist and he answered and he was like, oh no, like I see the prescription on my end. And I was like, oh great, like my patient's been there for an hour, like can we just give him his medication, like it's all cleared on my end? And he was like, no, I feel uncomfortable. It's like, what do you mean? Like, did I write it wrong? And he was like, no, I just, feel really uncomfortable about replacing Suboxone before it's due. And I was like, it's lost. Like, and you have a prescription for it. And then he refused. So that's when, so this is when I was, sorry, maybe it was my 3rd year. I don't remember, but I was in the middle of interviews for addiction medicine fellowship. And so I texted my maybe favorite person in the whole world and friend Ruth, and it was sort of like a rage text of like, oh, I have like more stories to tell on the interview trail, like this just happened today. And at that point I didn't sort of have anything other than just like this rage, and that I was telling Ruth. And so Ruth shared, so this is actually a screenshot from our text. She was like, you need to send this to Steve. He's working with the Department of Justice on this issue. And I was like, oh, interesting. And I didn't really know if anything would pan out, but I was like, I usually do what Ruth tells me and things happen. So like, yeah, I'll do it. So later, I texted Steve, which you can see here, and just shared the same story. And then Steve was really sort of, upset by this, but then he had like an aha moment. And so he connected me with Greg. And so this Greg emailed me pretty quickly, and then he was like, I'll call you like within the next couple of days, which in fact he did. And at this point, I had no context for like who Greg was, right? And which was probably for the best, because then I would have been like really nervous talking to him. But again, I was like in clinic a couple of days later, like in between patients, and my phone rings and it's Greg, and I was like, okay. So I answered, and I like shared my story of what happened to this patient, and I thought I was just reporting it into this like black hole. Like, what is even the point? But then Greg starts explaining the American with Disabilities Act to me, and I was sort of caught off guard because I thought it'd be a 2-minute convo. I could go see my next patient. So Greg, do you mind sharing with everyone what you taught me in that phone call about the American with Disabilities Act?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks a lot, everybody. And I feel like Oz, I'm guessing I'm just a disembodied voice coming down from above. But I think I know many of you. If I don't know you, you can absolutely reach out to me later. And so you can just imagine me talking there. And I wish I was there. But I'm going to start off with just kind of giving the tool that we're talking about here, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's a tool for me because this is the legal mechanism that we can use to address many of the barriers that we're going to talk about here. And so that umbrella concept, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, this protects individuals with disabilities from discriminatory treatment when that treatment is based on disability. So talking about what that means, a disability, we'll give you the definition here, it's a physical or mental impairment that affects one or more major life functions. Very broad, and I'll demonstrate in a moment how that applies in these contexts. And it really covers 3 different entities. First, places of employment. We're not going to talk as much about that, but it's relevant to know. Second is state or local governments. So there we're talking about the jails, the prisons, the parole board, for example. And then the third category is places of public accommodations. And public accommodations is what is kind of centered here. A public accommodation is not a public place, but it's an entity that does business with the public. So healthcare providers, pharmacies, etc. These would fall under this category of places of public accommodation. Do you want to flip to the next slide? So talking about, and I think it's actually 2 slides here. There we go. Talking about who is protected, a disability, again, physical or mental impairment that affects one or more major life functions. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see when Congress, and if you click one more time, when Congress defined this, it was very clear that physical or mental impairment includes drug addiction and alcoholism. So this was drafted in 1991. Fast forward now to 2018, which is when we first started addressing this issue. It's important to know that treatment is inherently linked to disability. So when barriers are created, no, you can stick there. When barriers are created for treatment, those barriers are inherently tied to the disability. So here we're talking about barriers to access to a particular medication. When that medication is used to treat a disability, the barrier for the medication is legally a barrier for the disability itself. That's how we can get to these issues through the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're recognizing that anything that treats a disability, anything that accommodates a disability. So for example, we will allow people with mobility impairments, but we're just not going to allow people with walkers in our facility. You can realize at that point, well, the walker is needed to treat the mobility impairment or accommodate the mobility impairment. So by creating that barrier, you're creating a barrier for the disability. If you go to the next slide. Now, how that applies in an outpatient setting. And if you click one more time, there's a lot of broad words that we use as to what we're going to cover. But I want to focus in and hone in on just a few things. And that is, an entity shall not impose or apply eligibility criteria that screens out or tends to screen out an individual with a disability or any class of individuals with disabilities. What does this mean in an outpatient setting? Well, if a SNF, for example, says we don't accept patients on buprenorphine, that is going to screen out people with opioid use disorder who need buprenorphine to treat the opioid use disorder. So you can see how these eligibility criteria issues create screening effects that affect whole categories of people with disability, and that's why they're unlawful. So if you want to go to the next slide, I think this is going to be you.
So just a reminder, 21-year-old person lost his Suboxone and asked for a refill. And the pharmacist wouldn't give it because he was uncomfortable. And so what can we do in these situations? So first, when I say self-advocacy, I don't mean on the patient's behalf because they've done their part, right? They've showed up at their office, they've reached out to us asking for help. So the self-advocacy is on the part of the provider. And so, you know, in this case, it was attempting to call the pharmacist. This was not inside of Boston. This was outside. And so I ultimately ended up sending the prescription to another pharmacy. But I just want to share, you know, this has actually also happened in Boston down the street from a clinic I used to work at. And, you know, things that you can do that, you know, I can share from my experiences. I just walked over to the pharmacy, and for those who work with me in the hospital, you know, you get a big red badge that says doctor, and it's like really exciting. And normally I keep it tucked in my pocket because anyway, but when I went up to, so I stood in line at the pharmacy, and then I pulled out my badge and I was like, sup, like sent the prescription and oh, it'll be ready in 10 minutes. And so, you know, something sort of as simple as that really takes the burden off your patient who's already done their job. And you know, we're in a broken system. And I think, you know, for folks whose lives are chaotic, you know, we often as providers sort of don't have at least that type of chaos and sort of have the bandwidth to do a little bit more. I'll also just sort of add in as a second part of this, like advocacy on the provider's behalf, is oftentimes with controlled substances, if a patient doesn't have a form of ID, which is actually really common for a lot of folks, you know, they might not be dispensed their medication. And so if you actually just call the pharmacy in advance and tell them, I'm sending this prescription, this person is coming to pick it up, they will actually, I mean, there's exceptions, but a lot of times they'll be like, oh, okay, you know, because you're the doctor that called. And so really sort of using the power that is given to you as a provider. And then there is a long-term solution to try to work towards systemic change, which is reporting to Greg. And yeah, I don't know, Greg, do you want to have anything else to add sort of when folks email you what to expect?
Yeah, and expect systemic change, as you all know, takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes more than one, you know, enforcement action on my part, as studies have shown. And one of the things to note here is, like, for the SNF example that I gave earlier, we've been actively working on these cases with SNFs now. I think we entered into 11 different agreements covering more than 70 different SNFs at this point. I'm soon about to enter into another agreement on that front, requiring the SNF to not engage in this kind of discriminatory behavior. We make all of our settlement agreements publicly available, and I think that we have a QR code at the end of this presentation where you can actually access this. And going to Ruchi's notion of immediate solution, self-advocacy is you can, you know, share these enforcement agreements with the SNF if you're trying to advocate to get a particular patient in, because, you know, you could say at some point, you know, it would be a shame if the Department of Justice were to investigate you or have to address this if you, you know, it's pretty long-standing now that they've been working on these issues. And SNFs recently, I think, have begun to change their ways, so it could just require some education. But we do make our enforcement actions available. On the outpatient pharmacy side here, this is an area that I'm actively working on. So I do request that you contact me if you run into pharmacies that are unwilling to fill buprenorphine prescriptions, and we can kind of track down where this is happening and how this is happening, because this is going to be another systemic one that we're looking at. But again, I need to hear about these issues, and you are the ones seeing these issues. And so please feel free to share these with me.
So me and Greg are on the phone. He's like explained all this to me, and I'm like, whoa, like this is someone, you know, who's like in the legal space and clearly like so passionate and well informed. Still don't really have any idea like who I'm talking to, but I was like, like while I have you on the phone, like, can I ask you another question? Greg's like, sure. It's like, okay, so like it sounds like you're an important legal person. Can I talk to you about another primary care patient of mine? And so this is a 52-year-old person, similar past medical history, opioid use disorders, on Suboxone 8 3 times a day. I met him a couple months ago. And he liked coming to see me every 2 weeks. We would talk about like bagel places that existed around the clinic, and he would sort of go there after clinic and come back the next time and report back. Anyway, all to say this patient very consistently came every appointment. And then one day he suddenly stopped showing up, and that was like odd. He lived in a type of sober house basically, and when I reached out to them, after he missed his appointment, I wasn't directly allowed to talk to him. They said they would take the message, and I was like, okay. And then I sent like a bridge script for like a week, and then I was like, just tell him like I rescheduled his appointment, can't make it, we can reschedule. Another week goes by, misses that appointment, like this is really weird. I like sent another bridge script and then called the home again. And this time I think I got someone who like didn't know the rules that well, and said, oh, like he hasn't actually been at the house for like a couple of weeks. And I was like, oh, do you know where he is? And he's like, I don't know. And I was like, okay. But had still sent the bridge script and was hoping for the best. And then a couple of weeks later, got one letter in my mailbox at clinic, and those letters turned into a lot of letters from this patient who had been incarcerated at a county jail. And he shared with me that he wasn't being prescribed his Suboxone, which I was consistently prescribing every 2 weeks. And so I shared this with Greg, and I was like, so like, sorry, this sounds not okay. Can you help? And Greg was like, oh boy, can I help? And so it's like, this is my stuff. And so Greg, can you share with me, or share with everyone what you shared with me?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to get down to what we call Title II of the ADA, which addresses state and local government. And here I'm just going to get into the practical issues. So a jail or prison can't discontinue MOUD treatment that has already begun prior to intake at the correctional facility. So somebody comes in already prescribed bup or in methadone treatment, they cannot be removed upon intake. Second, it's subtly different, but it's an important distinction. Jail or prison can't create administrative or policy barriers against initiating MOUD treatment. So right now, I would say most of the jails and prisons in Massachusetts are doing bullet point 1 or mostly doing bullet point 1. There's some issues that we need to work out where some facilities might have this barrier, which I think impacted the particular patient here, where if they haven't filled the script within 30 days or something like that, then they're not counting it as continuing MOUD treatment. We need to fix that. We're working on fixing that across the board. But the jail or prison can't create these policy barriers against initiating MOUD treatment. This is something that not all of the facilities are there yet. Most of the facilities are on their way. They're already beginning, if we take step 1, that first bullet point, now they're starting to figure out how to do step 2. Step 3, jail or prison can't discontinue MOUD treatment because somebody might be illegally using drugs. This is a misconception that exists. So there's this red herring that the ADA doesn't apply to somebody who's currently engaged in the illegal use of drugs. That's true, but there's this big asterisk on it where that doesn't apply to the provision of health services. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about the provision of health services. Same in an outpatient setting, same with a private entity. You can't refuse health treatment simply because somebody's illegally using drugs. So if somebody arrives at a jail or prison and they test positive for cocaine, but they're also taking their buprenorphine or prescribed buprenorphine, you can't remove them from the buprenorphine just because of the cocaine use. This is something that I think facilities were getting wrong at first, but hopefully If you hear of those issues, please alert me because that shouldn't be happening. And then separate from the correctional facilities, judges and probation officers can't be mandating people onto specific forms of medication as a matter of policy. So we saw this a while ago with parole board, as the parole board was requiring people onto injectable naltrexone as a condition of parole. That can't happen. Same, a judge in a drug court can't mandate people onto injectable naltrexone as a matter of, you know, you're coming through my drug court, this is all you can do in my drug court. That can't happen. Judges and probation officers can't mandate specific forms of medication. And this goes across the criminal justice system, all the way from probation, pre-incarceration, all the way on through parole. You can probably skip the next slide and go to the next one in 2, and right there. And we've entered into agreements with the trial court system. We, investigated the trial court system. We investigated all jails and prisons in Massachusetts that were not providing the medication, I want to say prior to October of 2018. And the Mass Parole Board. We have agreements with all of these entities. You can find the agreements in the QR code there.
So if you haven't pulled out your phones, I'll give you all a sec to do so. I will say I also have handouts to give with the QR code on it for easy access. So this isn't the only place you'll find. All right, so what to do when this happens? And so again, the self-advocacy piece is on the part of the provider. And so until I got connected with Greg at this point, I had attempted to, so things that you can do sort of as a first step to try to have something immediate happen, right? Because as we talked about, sort of this legal piece can take some time. So calling the facility, being asked to be transferred to medical, and sharing that you're their primary care provider. They will insist that the person needs to like sign a release. And so that's something, that you're like, okay, we'll tell them. And if they sign a release, things should sort of happen, which it often doesn't, unfortunately. And so that's why we get lovely people like Amelia involved, who will chat a little bit about her role and the work she does and just a little bit. But again, places to report to. And so I actually would advise having these 2 phone numbers saved in your phone. Again, they're on the handouts, but they're just, for convenience, you're like in the midst of your busy day, but you can still very easily make a call to report these injustices. Okay, and then a third situation that I think many of us have encountered. So this is a 58-year-old person, has a past medical history of hepatitis C, has opioid use disorder. He's on a really, really small dose of methadone, which shouldn't make a difference. I'm like, oh, even like on 15, sorry, I'll take it. I'm like, come on. Anyway, who's admitted with right lower extremity neck fash. And so physical therapy evaluated him, and their recommendation was that, yes, he would benefit from a SAR. And then this person ends up being in the hospital. So he's like medically clear, just awaiting a SAR placement. And weeks and weeks and weeks go by, and this is not okay. And I might just quickly add that SARS and SNFs will, of course, like never directly say that they're not, offering a spot to someone because of their history of substance use disorder. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to address that. But first, Greg's going to share sort of the legal piece of why this is illegal.
Yeah, so as we mentioned before, a public accommodation shall not impose eligibility criteria, screens out that tends to screen out an individual with a disability. So having this policy that, somebody has a history of IV drug use, somebody has a history of SUD, or somebody has or is prescribed buprenorphine would be unlawful. I will say they might not tell you that that's the reason that they're denying the patient, but that doesn't mean we can't investigate if that's what you think, because oftentimes they do write it down and write down that that's the reason why they're denying a particular patient. In fact, you'd be surprised at how often they write down over and over. I investigated one particular facility that I think in a 2-year time span, and this was looking at all of the operations. So I think they ran 11 different skilled nursing facilities, but there were more than 500 denials in that 2-year time span. And that where they had written down denying patient because of methadone, but not denying patient because of buprenorphine. So they often write it down, but even if they don't, we have mechanisms of investigating whether or not that's why it's happening.
And so how do we actually apply this when we're working in the hospital and folks are ready for discharge but not being accepted to any SARS or SNFs? And so the advocacy piece of this is that, again, we've all sort of heard like in various capacities of, saying things really fast with like strong language. And so one is like, well, I'm going to report you to the U.S. Attorney's Office for an investigation, right? That's one. The other thing sort of is that, again, I will pass these out, but this QR code links to all the different cases that you can cite to the SARS SNF. And so, I have a ton of these because I want you to share them with your case managers. And two, again, we all know that sort of where our roles are different, but we're kind of equally stretched thin, just in different ways. And so, if you have a moment and the case management usually in their note that they write in the chart have like the phone number and like the contact information of the facility, you can hop on the phone and call them too and sort of share this like lingo and see if that results with sort of like a short-term change. But long-term, similarly, reporting to Greg, you can file a complaint with the Department of Public Health, and then David Sinkman is an attorney with the Disability Law Center who you can also report to. And with that, we're going to switch focus to some advocacy steps that I hope we'll all engage in. So I actually want everyone to take out their phones, please. And so I'm really, really excited to introduce three folks who are here from two incredible organizations. Hopefully you've had a chance to engage with them outside. They're like the funnest tables that are out there. So first I'm gonna invite Jim and Sarah to talk about SmokeWorks. And yeah.
Hi, everybody. Jim Duffy, Director of SmokeWorks. I'm going to put Sarah on the spot for a moment. This is Sarah Fight, Operations Manager for SmokeWorks.
Hi, everybody.
Just came up with that title right now.
That's perfect. That's what we call the battlefield promotion.
Who I've learned over this morning has the elevator pitch down.
So SmokeWorks began in 2017 as a group of coworkers who were outreach workers on MASAM who wanted to bring more people into AHOPE, into their SSP program, Safer Syringe program. And they said, wow, if we had something people actually wanted, like meth pipes or crack pipes, we could probably get some more people to come in, even people who don't inject drugs, who might not otherwise come. And that is how SmokeWorks was born. We are an entirely revenue-supported organization, so we're not even a nonprofit. We're technically a business, which is very weird for all of us. And we supply over 200 programs nationally, over 400,000 pipes just this year. That's crack and meth pipes for stimulant users of all kinds. Pipes. Oh, yes. Meth pipe, in case you didn't know, looks like this, except about 15 times smaller. Amphetamines can be used in a variety of ways. They can be used intranasally, through a rectal route, IV, and they can also be smoked. There is a significant differential of the impact, the harm, the potential for injury based on the route of administration. And SmokeWorks has been lucky enough to do research across multiple different sites showing that people, there are fewer injections taking place. There are fewer overdoses when people have the choice about how to use drugs. And yeah, this is one of our awesome tools that sort of demonstrates this. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jen.
Thank you very much. Well, with her motion, I'm going to be very quick because Ruchi is so generous with the time. I just want to say that in my time at the conference over the last 2 days, I have heard one way or another repeatedly that there's no reason to settle.
Yeah.
And I hear that in conversations about methadone. I hear that in conversations about advocacy, about our strongest tools sometimes being our ears and our feet to walk over the pharmacy and get shit done. For us, that means in harm reduction, understanding and accepting, admitting that syringes aren't enough, that we can only attack so many of the problems associated with drug use. We only have tools that are tied back to the days when HIV and AIDS were a scare tactic. And we can expand upon that. We can find risk mitigation tools to prevent transmission of Hep C, to prevent HIV, soft tissue infection, endocarditis, things that we really just don't talk about in harm reduction among the entirety of the drug using population, not just those who inject opioids. That being the overarching goal, SmokeWorks is a little unusual, and not just what we do, but how we do it. Community-based organizations, very anxious to start publishing on the effects of pipe distribution alongside syringe exchange. We have a publication pending. We're going to launch program evaluations the next few years. I hope one day we're going to get room together, and like Ari this morning, I can come up with slide after data to show you what this does for folks. In the meantime, I've got full shot of the world and the anecdotal, and I've got story after story I'd love to tell, but I'm just going to leave you with this. One of the last programs that reached out with some feedback on their first day of pipe distribution said one of their participants came in to say, "This saved my job." And that's not my favorite, because I don't want your value in recovery or in life to be tied to your work. I want your value to be reinforced by autonomy. But imagine that. And we can do that for folks if we expand on what we think is traditional harm reduction. I'm very grateful for being here, the reception we received. Ruchi, congratulations. Thank you for sharing your time.
Thanks, Sarah and Jim. And so, yeah, I think we should talk about that. And so I'm going to introduce Harrison next, but before I do, I just want to say that we talked about sort of what this organization can do going forward. And I think, there's many things that we can do as a medical community, but again, sort of speaking to the power that we have, because that's how the system works with our degrees and et cetera. And so I think, we need to actually be really, really partnering with organizations that know what the hell they're doing, right? Like we really do, like we're behind, like we need to learn from them. And so I think having spaces where we can really, really collaborate together. I know some folks might have been at the Liberate Methadone conference last week, and that was incredible. Every single panel was in collaboration with academic folks and folks from the community and folks with lived and living experiences. And I think that's really how change is going to happen in a meaningful way, right? Because we can't just operate in a silo. We need to listen and learn from the folks that we, in theory, are trying to advocate for. And so with that, right, like the world needs funds to run. And so you can pull out your phones and use this QR code. And if you're so inclined to please donate to SmokeWorks while we're here together. I would also use my phone, but I was on call, and so I had to give it to my co-fellow to answer the hospital, or else I would do it right now too. But please take a moment, pull out your phones, and donate to support the life-saving work that Jim and Sarah engage in on a daily basis.
That slide is sold. Those numbers are so much better now. We did that like we are so close to 1 million pipes this year.
Change it because folks are using
Amazing.
QR code, but just
Yeah,
not
I was
about
gonna
these
say,
numbers. All right, awesome. And then next, I want to introduce Harrison. They work at One Stop. So take it away.
Hi, y'all. Harrison Usher. I use they, them pronouns. If you want to know more about like One Stop and all that, come see me at the table. I'll be out back. I love talking. I could talk for hours. I think most of us in here are familiar with what harm reduction is. If you're not, again, come see me afterwards. We'll talk all about it. I'll talk as long as you stand in front of me. But like based on like a lot of what I've been hearing today and yesterday and just talking with people, and I've worked in this field now for 2 years. Also, person in recovery from alcohol use disorder, 516 days today, 1 day at a time. And like, I guess like the reason I say that is because I am also still a substance user, though I use cannabis. I am prescribed, medications. So what I think if we're looking for positive change and using the tools and the power we have, the thing that comes to mind for me is, handing over the mic. And what I mean by that is instead of only advocating for people as patients, a lot of you work in, prominent and prodigious institutions of medicine and all of this. Hire people not only that are in recovery, long-term recovery, that's great, congratulations, I love it, but also people that are still using substances. because a lot of people that use substances are, in fact, almost all of them, if are fully capable of doing anything and everything. And I'm not talking just like the bottom of the ladder, like throughout organizations. I work with a lot of folks who do offshore fishing while also still maintaining a substance use, lifestyle. If they can do that work and survive, I think they can work in an office. I think they can, run an entire organization if they were given the chance and the ability and the empowerment. So rather than, saying, all right, yeah, we would love you to join our group as soon as you have 17 years of recovery and you have all these things that are like, this gold platinum standard. That's cool. Awesome. Love that. But also, we went, that documentary we watched was Loving the Time of Fentanyl, really recommend it. In Vancouver, they have an overdose prevention site, and their staff are people that either are formerly or currently using, and they even create space during their shifts to use for maintenance. So, and there's no reason why somebody can't do that. I am a maintenance user of caffeine. If I were to miss my afternoon cup of coffee, my productivity would go way down. I will have a headache. If I was somebody that had to operate some sort of equipment, I could make a mistake. I mean, I've seen that YouTube video of the crane that falls over, and it was, the guy was too sleepy and he fell asleep. Like, these things happen. So create the space, empower people. And if you're in a position to hire, do that. If you're not, go to your HR department and advocate, how do we create a space so that ADA, if an employer says we're ADA compliant, I don't know if Greg can speak to this. Can you deny somebody employment because they have a substance use disorder? That seems immoral to me.
Craig is off fighting in chess.
He's looking up the legal.
No. Did you want me to speak to that? I'm trying to read cues from you're just like a little pinprick on my computer. EEOC is where you would file these complaints, but absolutely you should file complaints on that. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission investigates that first part where I said employment is covered by the ADA. And so absolutely file complaints when that doesn't happen.
I think it comes out, I have this conversation a lot, unsafe versus uncomfortable. It came up in your, I'm uncomfortable giving this medication. I'm uncomfortable working with someone who uses heroin. Like, too bad. Get a different job. That's your problem. If someone can come in, do their work, regardless of what they're using or not using. If I have some sort of infectious, not infectious, but like HIV, Hep C, no one's going to deny me employment for working there because it's not really a safety issue. People used to think it was. Some people still do, but it's not. Actually, we were almost denied doing a testing event at a place because the residents were concerned that people with HIV would be coming in to get tested. We still did the event, but so that stigma does still exist throughout our society. So, we have the ability. And if your organization won't, or somebody do it anyway. I don't know how else to say it besides if the rule has to be broken, then break it. Hire people. I'm sure people like Greg will back you up, or we'll all get arrested together.
Thanks.
Blow it up and change it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And similarly, I would love for folks to pull out their phone and support One Stop in Harrison and their organization. So I'll give you a moment to do that.
The last thing I do want to say, which was, I think we need to say it loud and echo it as much as we can, because at the end of the day, what it comes down to, the thing we all share is that we want no more dead friends.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say it really loudly. If you don't like loud noises, plug your ears up or join me on the count of 3. So 1, 2, 3. No.
Oh, we're getting into that. So again, phone numbers that are on the sheet. So I'm just going to flip through this slide. And so next, we heard a lot from Greg, and so I want to have Amelia share a little bit about what else you can do when these things happen. And I'll let her do a little intro of herself too.
Thanks, Ruchi, and congratulations. When that award description was being read, I was like, wow, Ruchi should really get this. You're so deserving, and it's her advocacy that has brought me here today, connected me to clients to advocate for, using all of Greg's great precedent. So I'm currently a senior legal fellow with the Action Lab at the Center for Health Policy and Law at Northeastern University School of Law. But I'll be transitioning out of that soon. In the past 2 years, I've been able to work on the civil rights for people with addiction. And that's included taking one of Ruchi's patients, talking to Greg about things, and filing some federal lawsuits against prisons, against prison medical providers. Well, that's it. But it's been really fun. And I like to sue these people. Until we don't have to have this conversation anymore. So in between emailing Greg and reporting these to the federal agencies, I'm available. I want your clients, please. So we have a federal lawsuit in West Virginia where we're suing for access to medication for opioid use disorder. My client is now the only person incarcerated in West Virginia to be receiving Suboxone. They have some other options, but people get really scared when you sue them and they do what you want sometimes. So also using Greg's great precedent, one of my favorite things about what he's done is enable me to threaten prisons with his work. So it's pretty fun to say, here's all the data, here's the precedent in our state. And also I get to cite a lot of studies that people like you post and publish. So those are really helpful for us in law. And I invite them to give my client their medication or see me in federal court. And you know what? They usually give the medication. So please email me if you want to talk about any of this, if you have any questions, if you have people who need advocacy. So I said I'm transitioning. I'm going to a firm where their whole goal for me is to expand opioid litigation and take these clients who are being denied their civil rights because they have addiction. If people are being treated differently because of their categorization as a person with addiction, let me sue for that. So please email me if you have any questions about any of this, or if you need help navigating this system, any of it. I would love to talk about it and see what we could do. Thank you.
Couple quick plugs. They will be quick because we've talked about them a couple of times, which is really exciting, but please support overdose prevention centers. This QR code leads to like the Massachusetts 4 overdose prevention centers. You can join the mailing list, a variety of ways to get involved. You can support MORE, which is a Massachusetts organization for addiction recovery. They are incredible advocates for policy, and another thing that they do is they actually work with folks whose lives will be directly affected by this policy to keep them involved and engaged and elevate their voices. So I'll give you a minute to pull that up, but it's called MOAR, so Google it later. I think these other things Natalie and a bunch of other folks already touched on, but you know, changes that we can make in our sort of immediate environment in the hospital and in our clinics. Don't do UTOXs unless they're going to tell you something different. Like, what's the point? We talked a little bit about discomfort and you know, next time you're uncomfortable, think about it like discomfort versus danger, right? Like, are you in any sort of danger or are you just uncomfortable? And who is public safety really protecting? Like, and also you're going to have someone's room searched. They're going to like, they're, you know, oftentimes just an open, honest and conversation, kind, compassionate conversation can really do wonders. Know the difference between a use disorder and just use. And then also the racist war on drugs. So this is sort of some light reading material to get you started. But we know this, right? Black and brown folks are dying at incredible rates, higher than other folks. And sort of, Marielle and I have a patient in the STAR clinic who we just saw 2 weeks ago, and he is a Black gentleman in his like 50s, and he's like, you know, Black people don't go to doctors, and what should your response be to that? Yes, for absolutely valid reasons, right? And so open up the space, validate their feelings, and welcome them back, and you know, have them give you suggestions for what you can do to create a better, more person-centered environment. I'm gonna actually just open it up to questions, but basically the Modernizing Opiate Treatment Act, bring methadone into pharmacies, it's a medicine. I have a lot of folks I'd like to thank, but really quickly, obviously Ruth, and then a ton of other folks who are listed here. Many of them are here in the audience. I'm grateful. And also my co-fellow, Emily, who's holding my pager and phone. And we've been on this journey together, and for rants and feelings and all the things. So I'll open up for questions now. I said questions, but do we actually have time? Okay.
I'll be quick. Hi, thank you guys so much. I wish I could have you all over at the Shah because we have a lot of conversations to have. I really want to thank you, Dr. Shah and all the team. My big question is for you guys as well as maybe Greg, if you can still hear us. The question around substance like Suboxone being refilled at a pharmacy. Does that require the Mass Health to also pay for it?
I can hear you. Let's follow up on that. I think I'd want to know a little bit more facts on that. So is the issue that Mass Health is denying payment on the subsequent refills?
We're being told that if a person is replacing medication they weren't able to get from they lost their Suboxone, we sent a new prescription for a week until their next appointment. The pharmacy are saying they can't refill it because Mass Health won't pay for it and the client doesn't have the funds for it.
Okay, let's follow up on that. I can look into how that's going to specifically work, and I haven't been confronted with that yet, but we can figure that out.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Marie. I'm a fellow at Boston Children's. I previously did my residency training in Tennessee, though, and for those who don't know, Tennessee is not Massachusetts. So like we have a lot of issues where pharmacies, for example, especially in recent months, won't even carry Suboxone because the DEA is cracking down. So they say, even though they're carrying all the other controlled substances. But I did have a patient who the pharmacist, this was a Suboxone script. I was calling it in due to logistical issues. We were not able to e-script it. And the pharmacist was incredibly rude, hung up on me, wouldn't give me his name. All this, by the way, after keeping me on hold for an hour to call in the script. And so this is like 6 or 7 p.m. I had just called in 24 other scripts for the 24 other patients I'd seen that day. So basically my question is there a way to develop some kind of system to report these things after hours? Because his refusing to fill this script for this patient who was on time. He gets a script at the same pharmacy every 28 days. Like this wasn't a lost script or anything like that. But potentially putting this patient into withdrawal, causing direct patient harm just because he's refusing to fill a script that is being called in, which is not illegal in the state of Tennessee. I checked, I double checked and triple checked. So is there some kind of way to report these things in the moment so that patients don't have to suffer because of someone who is abusing their authority?
So I'm going to go ahead and say, unfortunately, that's going to be a state-by-state basis. What I do recommend is when you have conversations like that, and I know this isn't in real time going to be a real-time help, but when you do have conversations like that, if you could, as soon as possible after having that conversation, just take notes about all the impressions, everything that happened, what you remember happening on that conversation, because real-time notes that are taken in real time as you're talking to somebody or shortly thereafter, for me as an attorney who would be investigating or as I build evidence, those are completely helpful because who didn't write notes is the pharmacist. And what better way to have a record of what happened is you in that moment. I believe that various states would have to enact, hotlines in order to address that in real time, unfortunately. My goal, and I know that this doesn't help the patient in the immediate issues, but my goal is to address those issues systemically so that it never even comes to that. So, and I think, this is something that, as I mentioned before, on the pharmacy situation, we're actively working on. And just so you know, when I enter into a settlement agreement with a facility in Massachusetts, that facility does business across the country. That settlement agreement applies across the country. There are only a few big pharmacies, right? And so like the goal is to try to address this issue. So I would love to follow up with you. I think we maybe have crossed paths before, but I'd love to follow up with you on this, because I do think that this is an area that is, the pharmacy area particularly, is an area that's ripe for more work.
And it is all documented in the patient's chart, because I did immediately document as it happened in real time.
Very helpful. That's very helpful. And I recommend that to anybody and everybody, to document these conversations when they're happening, because that is extremely helpful for establishing that record.
You guys, we're gonna have to take no more questions because we're actually now running really behind. It was an amazing panel, amazing with Dr. Ruchi Shah, of course.